Urana and I recorded 2 conversations within a week. What you're about to hear is the second. Unfortunately, the video component of our first recording wasn't usable, but the audio held some beautiful gems that I didn't want to lose. While there's some overlap between the two, each conversation carries its own rhythm and depth, so I've decided to edit the audio from our first session, and I'll be sharing parts of it on my Substack, Hearthwoven. If you'd like to listen in on some of that initial journey and explore threads related to today's themes in a different way, you'll find the link in the show notes. And if you enjoy the extra content, consider becoming an early subscriber for free. There's much more to come. If you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your favorite podcast platform and to join us on YouTube for the visual side of the project. Your presence, ratings, shares, and thoughtful comments truly nurture this humble offering's ongoing organic growth. Thank you for being here. And just a note before we begin, I've tagged a few words and an invitation onto the end of this conversation, so feel free to linger a few extra minutes after we've said our goodbyes. Now, let's move toward today's conversation. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Urana Jackson. This conversation with Urana unfolds as a rich inquiry into healing as an initiatory process, an embodied, relational, and sacred threshold crossing. Tracing the roots of her work with Safe House 7, Urana reflects on some of the pivotal experiences that have shaped her path. Growing up amid the brackish confluence of ocean and natural spring, navigating a complex multicultural identity, and integrating Yoruba healing traditions with Western psychological praxis. Together, we explore the psycho-somatic-social-spiritual architecture of thresholds in personal, cultural, and collective transformation, emphasizing the need for intention, containment, and reverence, especially for those most impacted by systemic oppression. Urana highlights the power of ancestral connection, the necessity of reciprocity and healing, and the integration of psychedelic medicine within liberatory frameworks for BIPOC communities. With grounded insight and visionary clarity, she invites us to reimagine healing not as a solo endeavor or clinical quick fix, but as a lifelong rite of relational liberation. Urana Jackson is a spaceholder, healing justice practitioner, and psychotherapist. She has worked in community-based mental health for over 25 years, developing and overseeing mental health programs and curriculums in the San Francisco juvenile justice system, Oakland public schools, and various Bay Area nonprofits. She was an instructor for 20 years of restorative justice at UC Berkeley School of Law summer legal fellowship programs. And she is also a published author of Girls Rising, a workbook centered on developing adolescent social, emotional, and spiritual development. Urana is also the creator of a psycho-spiritual therapeutic protocol called Safe House 7, which integrates various Western therapeutic modalities and the ancient West African spiritual tradition of Ifa that she was inducted into in early 2000. Urana is a devotee of Onile, a daughter, partner, bonus mom, and loyal servant to 2 Siamese cats. Now, let's dive into the richly layered architecture of change with our beautiful and powerful guest for today, Urana Jackson. I'd love to know more about how you have gotten to this point in your life and how Safe House 7 has emerged through you, understanding more about some of your pivotal life experiences, maybe some important threshold moments, and your orientation and frame that you're bringing to your work in this conversation today. So you can pick up and go wherever you'd like, and I'm here excited to listen.
Okay, thank you. Such a lot to cover. I think maybe just to start off the land that I came from. I was raised in a small little beach town in Los Angeles, and it's based off of my website. It's where the natural springs from the Santa Monica Mountains, unceded Chumash land, it came down and comes into and there's a confluence with the ocean, and that area is called the brackish.
Mm.
And spent a lot of my childhood kind of in the two waters.
Mm.
And that just being really a symbol of my own just embodiment of bringing in different cultures. My mother she's white, European, Norwegian, and Scottish.
Mm.
And my father is Black with Nigerian roots. I also have indigenous roots too. I'm really careful, not to identify too much with my indigenous piece, because I was not born and raised. And for me, it's not just about blood, it's about also embodiment of culture.
Mm.
And so that wasn't something that was incorporated until much later on into my life. So it still is a confluence, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that, bringing in these different identities and culture and waters, right, really became kind of the embodiment of even the work that I did in the world, and do in the world. And so I think Safe House 7, if I think about its origins, I think I would draw upon three threads.
Mm.
So once again, these three kind of coming together. And I think, the first has to do with my whole bringing together of the work that I have done. I have about 25 plus years of community mental health.
Mm.
And I've done work in the juvenile hall, like the prisons, also in the Oakland public schools. I've worked in housing projects. I worked at UC Berkeley, creating kind of it's a restorative justice. It was an offering that was part of a summer program that I did for 20 years. And in all of these spaces, I would spend some time just getting to know, the people that I was working with, and really observing what I had sensed like the issues were. And in all of these spaces, I started kind of formulating a process. Sometimes it was a workshop, and sometimes it was like a year-long program, curriculums, right? Really centering around what I thought was the issue and bringing in all of these different ways of exploring the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's many, many different examples I have in a way that I did that. And I did this throughout 25 years. And then about 3 years ago, I, decided that like I was just going to go and do, just do private practice, because it was a really, really rich offering that I put forward. But 25 plus years in the public sphere, it was a lot, and I was in really intense spaces.
Yeah.
So I kind of did this kind of semi-retirement thing that I thought I was going to be doing, and really engage in private practice, of which I had throughout the time, but I would have 4 or 5 clients.
Mm.
And what was happening, the majority of my clients were BIPOC or Black. And I was, doing general talk therapy with them. And I was finding a limit to that and that exploration. And there were certain themes that kind of kept on coming forward, certain explorations that we would be doing, like looking at multi-generational transmission processes and ancestors, and dreams was coming up over and over again. And really a desire for people to connect spiritually and not knowing how to do that necessarily, right? And these things were emerging over and over again, that I start to begin to concretize as thresholds. What the second, and this is the second thread I think I would add to this, is that I was initiated into a West African spiritual tradition called Ifa, and we also call it Isheshe. And I can speak a little bit about that maybe a little bit later, but it's a very ancient tradition. And there was a way in which, as I was exploring it, I really kind of came into initiation in 2005. And so it was very slow kind of exploration and practice that I was in. And in the exploration, I was seeing that there was a lot of different principles and practices and technology within the tradition itself that very much mirrored Western praxis, therapeutic practice. And I, on one level, I thought it was very cool to find that confluence, right? But I also felt like this was another example of where this kind of erasure happened,
right,
within the African tradition, where we have created these principles and practices that somehow got, not fully honored, wanting to bring them back into the therapeutic praxis, right? But naming them from its source, from its indigenous African source, right? And so this is kind of where I started to formalize these 7 thresholds, I can go over, and really started working in this way with individuals and couples in a more formal, taking them through these thresholds. And then the last piece, I think the last thread that really kind of formalized all of this, is that in about 2018 or 19, I went through a psychedelic assisted therapy program to get certified in it. And, there's a way in which the protocol for holding psychedelic medicine there was a way it was very Western, very sterile, very disconnected from culture. And for the people, the very few people of color who were in this training, we felt that, there was a little bit of lack. And I was at a brunch that was connected to, it's a psychedelic space for Black folks who are also clinicians. And somebody had asked me about Safe House 7, so I was going through the thresholds with them. And at the end, they were like, this would be an ideal kind of container for the medicine, and not to just center the medicine, but really have it connected to a larger context, right? And so it was through that we started piloting what Safe House 7 could be in a group setting, to make it more accessible for people of color, and specifically also Black folks, to make it more accessible, not only culturally, but financially. So that's where it's ended. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So much there. And I think we'll bring back different aspects of what you just shared throughout the conversation. But I want to hear a little bit about let's discuss, not necessarily yet specifically the thresholds of Safe House 7, but just thresholds in general, because this is language that some folks might not even understand what we're meaning by that. And I think that it's a vast terrain to explore. But the thing is the language and us exploring it a little bit will hopefully help folks understand that it's actually deeply embedded in our psycho-spiritual somatic experience of being a human, being alive on Earth. That thresholds are necessary developmental experiences that are absolutely inevitable, right? And
Yes.
I think that ancient cultures, indigenous cultures, tended to understand that. And so threshold experiences were curated, developed over time, and systematically implemented through the community during the arc of individual and group lifetime. So I'd love to just explore a bit about like what thresholds mean to you, and yeah, just kind of jam on that a bit before we get into the specific thresholds of your work.
I think the first thing that comes to me is I think that thresholds is a symbol of change.
Mhm.
And I think, I think that this creation, it is constant fluid change, right? But this is a way in which we've come from one place and we're going to another place, and we don't have to define. In fact, we can't define what that other place is.
Mhm.
Right? That's the mystery and that's the beauty. But the threshold becomes the entrance of that change, of that movement that we're constantly in, right? Like with thresholds from day to day, we're
Yeah.
stepping into thresholds, right? And then there's larger arcs that we are coming into that are thresholds. And I think healing, is really, again, it's an invitation of change.
Mhm.
And so thresholds to me needs to be a part of any healing process, right? Whatever that change moves into, it's liminal. It's liminal space, and that also is mystery.
Mhm.
Right. So I think that's like the first thing that comes to me when I think of a threshold.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So, like you said, there's all of these smaller thresholds that happen day to day. And then it's this holonic kind of psycho-spiritual structure where we then meet bigger thresholds. And throughout a lifetime, there's at least a few, maybe a handful of like really big ones. And an example could be, boyhood into manhood, girlhood into womanhood.
Yes.
Another example, marriage, children, but also the death of a loved one. Maybe the significant loss of something within yourself, or an injury that causes a loss of certain kinds of function, right? So I'm just trying to kind of lay out examples so people can start to see in their own life experience and contemplate how these might arrive. And because you can see in those examples that you were in one state of being, and then an event occurred and there was some kind of dismemberment, that you lost parts of yourself, maybe you sacrificed parts of yourself in order to then become anew, to take on new roles, new responsibilities, new capacities. And so thresholds are really the liminal space, like you said, of transformative process.
Yes.
And transformation is inherent across the earthly matrix. All beings go through thresholds of transformation. And so the reason why I think the language and the understanding of thresholds is so important is because like we're speaking to, they're going to happen anyway, right? So to be literate in them as best you can. And that's not to say that you understand the mystery, right? So I'm reminded, and I mentioned the last time we met, but I'll say it again here, that, oh, and I forgot his name last time too, but the Irish poet, John O'Donohue. Yeah, he talked about thresholds a lot. And something he really emphasized was the importance of the approach. And that really is literacy. That's education, it's understanding. And in indigenous cultures, that would have just been a part of the culture. That would have just been a part of the orientation toward life and community building and development. But we don't really have that so much. We've lost the art of threshold crossing, as well as the literacy of even understanding. So just to bring that in again, the importance of approach. What does that mean to you? The importance of approaching a threshold.
Yeah. I mean, I think to speak also to everything that you're saying, the word initiation keeps on coming up to me, right? Like that we're going through these initiatory processes over and over again. And they have a lot of what in my tradition we called ashe, right? There's a lot of energetic kind of power within them, right? That there's a way that we can, when we do that in a way that's intentional, that we then get to take in that energy, and all information, all the download, all of the growth that comes from that. But it can also, that energy can undo us, right? So when we walk into threshold space, initiatory spaces, without intention, we find, for example, where I worked with teenagers for a really, really long time, and they are absolutely, whether they know it or not, going through thresholds. Right? And initiation into adulthood, and given no tools and no awareness and no technology and no community, right? We see what happens. And this isn't just like marginalized at-risk youth kids, right? This is all young people that they are experiencing higher levels of depression and anxiety and suicide than they ever have. Because the energies that are present right now on Earth and have been, they're big energies, and they're also entering into these initiatory spaces, and there's no even awareness, and they're being undone. Right. So that's an example of what happens when there is not intention and the tools to really enter into these really huge spaces.
So I'm not going to get too much into this, but I think it's important. I talked about this with Peter Eugene Bennett, which was a recent interview I published, and we were talking about suicide in men and in young men. And both him and I went through periods of quite serious suicidal tendencies. I mean, I was very close to ending my life, super close. At least that's how it felt at the time. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you mentioned it, but I think that there's an important aspect of that tendency, that the desire to die isn't bad, that it's not wrong, that there's actually an intelligence in it, that there's a deep knowing in the young man's system, using this example of a young man, that it's time to die.
Yes.
It's time to die. It's time to be reborn. You're not meant to be a boy anymore, any longer. It's time to become a man. You need to become anew. You need to be given dramatically different responsibilities, and to be seen and held accountable to those responsibilities in community. And so, like you're saying, it's an initiation that I think so many of our ancestors understood and enacted on purpose with intention and intelligence, in order to facilitate a good death.
That's right.
Right. And so, and yeah, and that's just totally amiss these days. And the consequences are not insubstantial. They are huge.
Because I worked so long with young people, that everything that you're speaking of, I realize most adults have not had given those initiatory kind of tools and really understanding. And we can look right now, what you're speaking of is so right. And I also think there's a macrocosm of it right now of humanity. Like we're also entering into a new threshold, and we can be baited by the toxic genocidal thrust that is happening right now, right? But here we are at a threshold, liminal space. What are our tools? What is our understanding of what is happening right now? Where is our community as we enter into this space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about, first of all, maybe just the name, Safe House 7. I mean, there's 7 thresholds, right?
Yes.
So that makes sense. Safe house, I can guess, right? But I'd love to hear how that name emerged and why it felt like the title to really put forth for this work.
Yeah. The name itself just dropped into my consciousness, and I was like, what is this? And the 7, yes, there's 7 thresholds, but also originally 7, I think, came from because I am crowned by an Orisha, and we can talk a little bit about that, but Orishas are like super deities, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like archetypal architecture kind of entities, and they crown people also. It's like an energetic that we hold.
Mm-hmm.
And one that crowns me is Yemaya. And Yemaya she's connected to the ocean, to the womb, to creation, and her number is 7. So this is really an offering to that aspect of nature and of Yemaya. So that's the 7. And then the safe house, I think a lot of people have different connotations with safe house. For me specifically, also just because of my own roots, a safe house is really connected to kind of the Underground Railroad. Right. So roughly during the period of like the 1790s to the 1860s, abolitionists established these safe houses throughout a network of the Underground Railroad for fugitive slaves freeing north. These spaces, and usually there were homes, were really spaces of shelter and safety and nourishment. It's a lot of where, the fugitive slaves, they were telling their stories of where they've come so far. And they were also given information and instructions on where to reach the next safe house, right? So this is very kind of a leaning into the abolitionist movement in general, where, it's not about our own freedom and liberation. It's a part of a network, right? Like that it's not just one person healing or helping somebody. It becomes a part of stages of a community. One person doesn't come. We bring the whole community with us as much as possible. Right? And it's not one destination. Right? Our liberatory experience is throughout our lifetime. So Safe House 7 then kind of that's where the name for me is sourced.
Beautiful. I had shivers at multiple points while you're explaining that. That's so rich and makes a whole lot of sense. So thank you for sharing that. And I was thinking too that, of course, to go through a threshold initiatory process, you're far more likely to move through it and become anew in a truly life-affirming and soulful way if you're safe, right? It's like, because the process is a process of liminality and dismemberment and transformation and change, which is already terrifying, right? So to be held in the safety of an intelligent, intentional container is an opportunity to give yourself over to that process with some degree of trust and faith. Whereas when you're plunged into it without the safety of that container, you don't know if you're going to make it through. And that can cause you to divert, to turn away from the process. So right before we got cut off there, I was just saying how there's that without being held in that safe container, like someone can get rightfully so scared to really enter that transformative threshold process, and might take a different pathway, might veer off the path in order to protect themselves, right? And that path might lead to some kind of self-harm, certainly some kind of self-ignorance. And so I guess I'm just trying to frame the essential nature of having this safe, intentional container, And so I love the name, and it makes a whole lot of sense. And so I'd love to hear more about the specific thresholds if you'd care to share.
Sure, yeah. The thresholds are named after terms and principles within the Ifa tradition. And again, that's super important because these practices really they're paralleling again, some of the modalities that are present in Western therapeutic praxis, right? But these are thousands and thousands of years old. And so this is kind of a form of reclamation, right? When we're kind of renaming these original sources. Yeah. So the first threshold is, it's called Oriki. And an Oriki is, it's like a melodic storytelling. It's a kind of oral database of family, right? So this is, it's a song, and sometimes it rhymes, and it's about telling about the family and the members within it, and sometimes ancestors, right? So for me, it's like, it's early hip hop. Really, of like, and it kind of braggadocious, right? Like it's like really, it's really activating and illustrating the family. Mm-hmm. This is how we bring in the ancestors, right? So that this work is really, its origins, it's at the beginning of it is honoring and bringing forward the ancestors. And when we're speaking of our ancestors, we're not doing it in an abstraction in our tradition. Like, we're really reawakening the relationality, and creating this like living umbilical cord that allows the past to live with the present with all of its wisdoms and gifts. So we're really spending some time honoring that aspect, telling those stories. And then we're also looking at the multi-generational like transmissions that are coming through, right? What accomplishments, what resiliency, but also the trauma, right? And really being able to kind of track that throughout the generations and looking at that, and also understanding that trauma doesn't come because of one particular person or because we have a dysfunctional family, that it's really sourced in historical systems of oppression, right? And in that way, it's more of a liberatory praxis, right? Like that we're understanding that this is the result of kidnapping and genocide and violence, right?
Mm,
History, and we can track this down and be able to name that,
mm,
right? It's the difference. You know, traditional therapy is very much about what's wrong with you, right? And trauma-informed therapy is like what happened to you.
right.
But liberatory praxis, liberatory therapy is really from like what happened to your people, what happened in the world, right? That caused.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of recasting where the source of the injury came from.
Mm-hmm.
Feels important for the participants to understand where this comes from,
So
right?
important. So
Yeah.
important. Yeah. Yeah.
The second piece is called Itan. And Itan is, again, it's storytelling, but it's your own personal story. And it really, and I'm not going to go into it right now, but we do this really creative process of being able to tell your own story and being witnessed around that. And
Mm,
really being able to identify inflection points within that. And also the scripts that you have created, whether consciously or unconsciously, that are at the center of some of the things that you're struggling with right now, right? So we do a whole process around that and really being able to hear each other's stories. And there's an opportunity later on to retell the story in a new way.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That really understands that we're, spiritual beings in this human incarnate experience, and all of those things were lessons,
Yeah.
right? Or ways in which they form the totality of who we are, right? So that's a different telling, and so there's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, just to say something on that, like stories really are the architecture of how we navigate the world, right?
Yes.
And it's not just psychologically, it's deeply embedded in your body. When you tell a story, when you hear a story, well, for example, you were just sharing about the safe houses, and I had like multiple points in my body, like shiver and like this electrical pulse. So you're telling a story, and it's I can feel it resonating deep in my body. And so that's happening every time we tell or hear or recite or even think of a story, that it's shaping our anatomy, it's shaping our soma. Like stories shape the world, like actually. So I just want to emphasize the importance of this particular threshold, as well as the last, which basically is like, what are the roots of the story in a way, right? What are the roots of the story of your particular expression in the world? And then getting clear on how you're telling your story and how it's affecting your life, and then how to reclaim it and reconfigure it and get really creative in the way in which you choose to that engage with and express your story in the now. Yeah.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I was thinking about that quote that the universe is made of stories, not atoms.
Yes. Yes.
I love that quote,
Yeah.
and it's all that what you're speaking.
Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah.
The third threshold it's three parts. It's iye, emi, ori. And there's a way in our tradition that we understand that we're not a monolithic self, right? Like just this one part, one perspective, that we are not only made of intrapsychic parts, but interdimensional parts, right? And there's a real confluence with Richard Schwartz's work in internal family systems, right? Like parts work.
Mm-hmm.
But in the E45 tradition, this is there's a layeredness to it of like all these different intrapsychic parts, all these interdimensional parts. And so I've really kind of isolated three parts that also have some conjoining with Richard Schwartz's parts work, and learning about not just those three parts, but learning about these different parts and how they speak to us within the body and what their needs are and how they get along with each other and how they cancel each other out. And really it's bringing all of these parts in harmony. It's being aware of what we've exiled, what we've pushed aside, right? And bringing it back into the nexus of the self, right? It's this democracy of the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
This is truly what we need to really reveal within ourselves. And then I think we could also do that politically, but we've marginalized parts of ourselves. We've inflated other parts, right? And so it's around getting balance within the intrapsychic self and understanding ourselves greater than just this one singular being.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because like healing is really moving, as far as I understand, it's just moving into greater wholeness. And that wholeness isn't just about you in your body, but it's you in relationship to all the other bodies. But all the other bodies really are just kind of a mirror of the many myriad aspects that live within your interiority too. And so the wholeness within is really, like you're saying, kind of a harmonizing or a democratizing of all these aspects that live within us that tend to be fractured because of so many reasons that I think are related to, as you're saying, just structural issues in our society at large and history. But I want to focus for a moment on this parts work a little bit more. What do you see as being some of the most important aspects of parts work, and how do you, because I'm not quite clear on how you melded the two. And so what did you really like take from the parts internal family systems and the West African tradition, and how did you meld those? Like, I'd love to understand the balance a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the concept of Iye is logos, right? It's the mind, it's the conditioning, it's the meaning making aspect of self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be equated to the ego functioning, the manager, let's just say in family systems, right? I mean, to me, the firefighter manager is a part of the ego structure, but in the Ifa tradition, Iye is only, a little aspect, but it is the logos, like not in the big L logos way, right? It's like it's intellectual functioning. So there's a way that when I'm speaking about Iye, there's a more kind of poetic, fluid understanding, but I can use examples within parts work and internal family systems for a more Western conception of it. And it's somewhere in between the two of the explanation of the two, where a person can start to feel into, right? Feel into that aspect of themselves. So not just to, logically, I mean, that's the manager right there, but logically understanding it, but also to feel that and get memories of ways and almost characterizations of Iye within their life.
Right.
So each of those, there's three that I isolated that have a parallel with internal family systems, but the process in which we discover them is not like parts work. It's not like internal family systems.
Right. Yeah. Because I was wondering about how a more kind of animate worldview might influence an internal family systems orientation. Because I think that there's like elements of animacy in a way in IFS,
Mm.
but it's certainly not indigenous and animate in that kind of indigenous sense. And so I was just wondering about how that might weave in. Yeah, and how as well the more communal aspect would also weave in. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue, because that particular threshold is learning about the intrapsychic aspect of the self, but
Okay.
the next threshold is a larger extension of self. Okay,
There
it's
we go.
called it's called Olokun, and Olokun again is an Orisha, so a super deity, and Olokun is both male and female, so I'll say they, because in different traditions it takes on different genders in some ways, or no gender at all. And so Olokun is representative of the deep, dark abyss of the sea, right? It's pure mystery. It's pure blackness, darkness. Whenever we speak of Olokun, we always say no one knows what lives at the bottom of the sea, right? And Olokun is, there's a little, maybe a little trepidation around this Orisha, because it's such a mystery, because it's so vast, but there's also deep, deep wealth that's connected to Olokun. If Olokun crowns you, right, like it's just this deep, rich abundance. That's not just material, right? It's almost like Pluto, like Platonic, like just. And so when we speak of that threshold, it is the mystery of and a larger extension of self. And so this includes practices where the mystery speaks to us of also of who and what we are. And so dream becomes one of the first things that we do. And we have this beautiful practice of dream work that we extend and do. But we do it in community, right? And then the second piece is with nature, and understanding us as extensions of nature, and communing with nature in these very specific and beautiful ways, and understanding nature as oracle, right? So that we're in communication and learn how to be in communication with nature. And these are old indigenous for all peoples, right? And learning that practice again. And then the third piece is, it would be the medicine work. And obviously we can do all of this without the medicine work. So it's never centering the medicine work, which is really different. But it also becomes kind of a threshold in itself for to communicate with the greater mystery of which we are a part of, right? So all of these things open up spaces of who we are and how we can speak in the world, and have that communication come to us through the mystery.
Yeah. Wow, powerful. So it's really a threshold of deepening into the kind of collective consciousness and the imaginal and the mythic and I guess just our natural capacity to commune with forces greater than us. Yeah. And of course, all those forces are sustained by mystery. Yeah. So can I ask what kind of medicine is used in this process?
Well, so, I mean, legally, right now, it would be something like ketamine, which is not plant medicine, but it is intended to be done with plant medicine. So this is what we're doing on a legal level right now, right?
Right.
To pilot that.
I see.
And it's also why it's the medicine piece is sometimes delineated in this process, because we don't necessarily need it.
Yeah.
Right? but if this, if legalization does come forward, then this would be, it would be added, and we would do probably psilocybin.
Psilocybin, yeah. But ketamine in the right context can be tremendously powerful and potent. A little bit more slippery though than psilocybin, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. So then so where are we at? That's 5.
Yeah. Yeah. The next one is it's called EBO. Okay. And I'll say that this threshold, in part, it's about integration, right? Like if you've done this form of parts work intrapsychically, and then you've done dream work, and then you've done communing with the nature. And if you did medicine, it's like now you need to synthesize all of this information, right? Like, what does this mean? Like, what are the threads that you're really pulling on, and how does this apply practically in your life, right? That's a piece of what this threshold is about. But the bigger piece is actually the EBO, and the EBO is an offering, right? So there's a way that when we're doing healing, we're going and we're receiving all of this insight and tools and perspective, community, and it's extractive. So to be a part of the sacred reciprocity that exists in all of the universe and nature itself, you give back. It is absolute requirement in healing to give back. So it's really an opportunity for somebody to identify, or a group to identify, how they're going to give back. And it can be in a creative form, ritual form. It might be dedicating a lot of time to a particular issue that feels really resonant, and so that this becomes a part of the natural ebb and flow of how we receive and give.
Yeah. And this reminds me of what we talked about in our last conversation about how healing is also it's a restorative practice. It's really restoration, and there's this understanding in eco-psychology, which it's beyond me why that isn't just psychology, that it has to be. Anyways, there's like this special eco-psychology, but one of the understandings is that in order to restore the self, there needs to be, as you're speaking, this intentional active engagement in reciprocal living. And
that's right.
Better yet, that reciprocity is active restoration of landscape and ecology, which of course isn't just I guess it isn't just the natural landscape, but could be human landscape too. I'm thinking if you're living inner city or something, that restoration could be just working with the ecology of your neighborhood. So is that a part of it too? You see that as being essential?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I'm speaking on, and it's up to each individual what they identify, how they give back. But I've noticed that a lot of people, when this threshold is present, that they really direct a lot of their energy towards the land, towards the planet. It's kind of almost, I would say 75% of people do that.
Well, it seems like the whole process up until that point is really really kind of preparing someone to naturally orient in that way. Makes a lot of sense to me. So then what's the 7th? So that was kind of integration. And
I think that was the might have been the 5th. There's 2 more, and a lot of times these 2 are combined into one, especially in a group setting. But the next one is called Ile Elofun, and it means our house. And there's an idea in Ifa that we have our earth family, right? That can be our blood, right? But also chosen family. And this is Ile. Ile means house. Our Ilofun is like, it's our earth family. There's also a deeper understanding of Ile Egbe, which is that we have a family in the spiritual world, and they can be separate from the one that is here on earth, right? But this is the Elofun, and this is where we, in individual therapy, I have them bring in their people, whoever that is, right? And we do a circle process, and they're basically getting just feedback and insight and love and appreciation. Like, we're bringing in community in the individual process. But in the group process, it's like, it's the group itself, really, that is giving the reflection of each individual member, and doing so in this really beautiful, formalized way. And the last piece, which is incorporated sometimes within that, is Iboda. And when we say Iboda, it's like closure. Like we see that at the end of ceremony, and it means closure. And a lot of what we're doing there is ritualizing that closure. And sometimes it's a grief transmutation process, but it's ceremony. We create the ceremony that brings the closure to the work.
Yeah. So important, that piece of bringing your people in, or at least being in the group, and being seen, recognized, held, praised for taking on a new form is so essential. Because how many folks, I mean, myself included, have some kind of significant healing threshold in their life, and then they kind of go back into their everyday life, family, friends and stuff, workplace, whatever. And it's like, no one fucking recognizes me, you know, like I'm actually different, but people are treating me like I'm not, but they feel the difference. And that's actually creating maybe subtle or gross ruptures. And then it actually stifles that integration piece. So important, so important. And I think that's something that's missing, heavily missing in therapeutic processes in general, right?
That's right.
Western processes, at least.
Yeah, I think we're held captive by other people's projections.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so we can...
So that's interesting, held captive. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more deeply, right? Because because we can only, it's like, if the people in our life, they're holding up like large parts of the infrastructure of the story we're living, right? And so rewriting our story, or changing it with intention, we can only do so much of that ourselves.
Right.
But there's this inherent piece, we need others to participate in it. And so if they don't, then that I haven't heard it like that or thought of it in that way lately, but you're so right. There's this captivity that really holds us in, bars us in from spreading our wings, or just expanding beyond, shedding. I'd love to hear you speak to that more.
It just, I'm so aware of the power of perception, of course, our own, right? We can transform worlds, our own world, based off of our perception, but the perception of others, right? I think that we're energetic beings, and we can feel perception. Right. And so that's the captive part of, like, I've become anew, right? But then all of this energetic projection is encapsulating me in this old way. And if I'm not surrounded by this newness of who I've become, right, then eventually, I default into the old. Right. And I think we can also take that on a planetary level right now, too, within humanity, right? Like, being caught in the sameness and afraid of change and what is to come, right? Like, we're holding the planet captive in some ways within that. But she is stronger than us. So
Right.
She will break that.
Yeah, she is. And I'm reminded of how Ram Dass would say, if you think that you're nearing enlightenment, go and spend a weekend with your family. And this is something I know firsthand intensely in my own life. And I hear it from basically anyone that, if we touch on this kind of conversation, that going back to your family structure, you think you've, become this person you're proud of, you've gone through so much, and then you go into that family structure and all that shit just kind of, not all of it, but so much of it just kind of like crumbles. And then you're left with this like core wounded self. It's so strange, but I think this frame you're bringing is actually just helping me personally in this moment to realize and to have more acceptance and appreciation around my path in life, because I have gone out beyond the bounds so many times. I've left places, I've left friend groups, I've left family, and I'm not saying that's all positive and good, right? I can see the shadow, or I can feel some of the shadow in that, and I've been working with that. But what I'm realizing right now is, in a new way, is, man, there's been a depth of intelligence in that, because I could feel the captivity. It's so many times in my life. And for me, it felt like the only way to really break out of that was to actually leave. And I know that's kind of a privileged thing to say, and not everyone has that opportunity, but maybe there's other ways to leave, so to say, right? To demarcate a pivotal moment, a threshold moment, and to extricate yourself on purpose, which is difficult. You're going to have to intentionally cultivate the kind of psychosocial structure that can hold that, but seems to be incredibly important as we're speaking to.
Yeah, I think even to practice the muscle, during COVID, a series of events happened where it turned out that my mom then had to come live with me. And she, on some level, still kind of lives with me. And it was so deep. I mean, this is the wisdom of the universe of, I'm holder of this space. I am speaking of this within sessions, right? With people, with individuals. And I come home and right, I'm constantly confronted with my teenage self, with her. And so over and over again, I have to keep coming home to this old, projection on some level that she's unconsciously holding of me, and really trying to live in the sovereignty of who I am, and like my adultism, right with her there. So yes, we get to leave, but also, what is that muscle to constantly be confronted around other people's projections, and you just trying to stand in silence, right, with what is actually true now.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about parts work again, and how like the harmonization, the integration, remaining steadfast in your commitment to establishing harmony and becoming more whole, that there is, it doesn't mean that you're not going to act out, that you're not going to engage in behavior that you don't love, that maybe you don't like at all, right? Because those parts of ourselves tend to be the exiled parts. And so it's not that you bring them out of exile and then all of a sudden they behave exactly how you need them or want them to behave. It's more about bringing them out of exile and saying, hey, I'm willing to learn how to give you the love that you didn't have, that caused you to run away, to hide.
That's right.
Right? I'm here to give you that love, which means kind of giving you your space to do what you need to do, which sometimes is doing, saying, behaving in a ridiculous way that you wouldn't want to, but, and just allowing that, and then working with it in the wake of it, to integrate it, understand it better, so that the next time it arises, there's a different facilitation or interaction allowed.
Every part has, I mean, challenging aspects to it, but it has its gift. Like for me, the teenager tells the truth and she speaks the truth, right?
Mm,
And if I can honor her, you know, and balance the other parts out too, right? Like then really I'm inciting honesty.
mm, yeah, yeah. Okay. This has been so great. I'm so glad we got to do this again today, and that there seems to be little tech issues overall. So let's bring it to a close. And I think I want to ask you, when's the last time you felt really beautiful?
Hmm. You know, this is what's just coming to me. This morning, I was able to walk along the bay, and I went to the very, very edge of the rocks, and I started to sing to the ocean, and it was this sense of like I was being like loved
Mm,
and appreciated, and and for me that's me feeling beautiful, you know, like it's just like this harmony and this acceptance and appreciation um by something. It could be my ancestors, it could be my spirit family, it can be creator, it can be nature. They're to me all of the same thing,
mhm.
right? Like that is like living in beauty, and I feel beautiful.
I love that answer. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Here we are at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank
This was
you.
really rich. So just love this conversation, and it's been so great getting to know you more and the work you're offering. It's so needed. It's so truly sacred. It's so richly layered, deeply attuned, and honest, and yeah, I just praise it. The life path that you've had to take to get to this point, to craft this offering and to continue being in the threshing process of it, and to get it to the people who need it. It's just, yeah, it's really, really wonderful. Thank you for doing what you do.
And thank you for doing what you do. This
Mm,
work as well. And I'm a mirror. And I mean that. We saw a lot of confluence between our work. And
mhm.
it's because you really, I believe, I called you a peacock
Yes.
without self-importance. I want to say that, like, really just the way that you speak, your offering, who you are, just is just so absolutely beautiful.
Really appreciate that. And I can feel how this conversation is actually, I'm in this process of reshaping my website and my work. I feel like that's happening a lot because I'm just changing so much at this season of my life. And so, of course, the work needs to change too. And so I can just feel how this conversation is actually informing me and shaping me and my orientation in like a really fundamental, important way. It's given me a lot more depth of understanding of how I want to craft what's coming through right now. So just on
Like
a
you said.
personal level, thank you so much. Before we complete this particular journey, I want to share a few words as well as an invitation. We live in a time of profound unraveling, where rusted institutions and dissociative ideals are crumbling, readying for compost, and the paths forward are anything but clear. Yet within these thresholds of transformation lie soulful invitations and initiations to unlearn, to die, to deepen, to be resurrected and reoriented toward what truly matters. Cultivating the inner capacity to meet change with devotional presence and unwavering courage, what I sometimes call threshold literacy, isn't a luxury or a privilege, it's a necessity, no matter where or who you are. While the overculture rushes ever faster toward a mechanical mess fueled by more, 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 avoiding the mystery that beckons from the cracks and edges, the soul moves differently. My work is a humble offering into that slower, wilder current where the soul remembers how to move. I've had the honor of working with several of you in the Wild Heart Revival community, and it's been a true blessing. The resonance and depth between us have been powerful, perhaps because we're already connected through a shared orientation cultivated here, as if we've been walking nearby all along, simply waiting for the right moment to meet at the crossroads. The heart of any therapeutic process is the relationship itself. So it makes perfect sense to me that some of the most meaningful therapeutic connections have emerged through this project that's so close to my own heart. As a threshold counselor with an online practice, I work with wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers, offering individual, couples, and group sessions, as well as the end-of-life guidance. Thresholds are life's inevitable, pivotal moments where the fertile soil of transformation meets the wild edge of possibility. They signal change, disruption, and deep opportunity. They invite you into a new pattern of being, essential to your authentic becoming and belonging. If you'd like to learn more, you'll find details on my website linked in the show notes. And know that I offer free insight calls, risk-free opportunities to connect, explore what's stirring in you, and sense whether it feels right to walk together for a time. Thank you for staying here for a few extra minutes. Thank you for tuning into this heartfelt conversation. I appreciate your presence more than you know. Bless your heart and your way.